This is a ManeHustle Media podcast. Konnichiwa, what's up, y'all? Welcome to Militantly Mixed, the podcast about race and identity from the mixed race perspective. I am your Sir Auntie, Sharmane Fury, and I know it has been a minute again since the last time I dropped an episode or even talked to another human being, but I have a reason to today. So we're back, and I'm going to share with you an upcoming event that I'm really excited about that I get to participate in with the founder and main organizer of an organization called Transpire. T, why don't you tell everybody about yourself and a little bit about what we're getting into?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is T. I am a queer, mixed race, trans librarian. I work in the Bay Area, and I am of Mexican and Danish descent. I am Mexican on my mom's side and on my dad's side, and I'm also Mexican and Danish. My father is biracial. My mom is multiracial through colonization and interracial marriage. My father's parents were Mexican and Danish primarily. I'm the grandchild of immigrants, and that has shaped my life profoundly. I grew up in Inglewood, California in the 1990s and early 2000s. My parents are from LA, so I'm second generation from LA and multi-generationally mixed. I identify as transmasculine and non-binary. I think I already said that, but yeah, I founded Transpire very recently this summer. It's an event for mixed and multiracial, trans and gender expansive people living in California. That's going to take place August 10th of this year.
Thank you for being here and giving me an opportunity to share it with the greater Militantly Mixed audience, because there might be people within our shared intersection that need a place, and Militantly Mixed provides part of it, but not all of it. And hopefully, with Transpire, they'll be able to find that next part that they're missing. So I just want to let everybody know how all this went down, or at least I'm not sure if it would have gone down differently had I not met your sibling in the wild. Not in the wild. It was an event. It was a mixed event. What am I talking about? Last June, I went back to LA, my home, to participate in the Free to Be Fest, which is put on by Dr. Jen, cousin of the show. And after the screenings and everything, your sibling approached me and just gave me the whole rundown about the two of you and how you found the show, and they had mentioned Transpire, but I'm not sure that I was taking it all in. It was just like, my sibling is doing this thing and da da da, and so we got to chatting quite a bit that night. So it was really also nice to like connect a username on Instagram that I've been familiar with for very long to a human being right in front of me that we got to chit chat, and they talked a lot about you and Transpire. And then you and I connected, I think maybe like a week or so later, about the event. So let's get into it a little bit. What is Transpire, and what is the mission of the work that you're trying to accomplish with it?
Transpire is a forum taking place online. I decided for that format of a forum to allow dialogue, but also to allow speakers who are organizers, professionals, artists, who have been involved in BIPOC and or mixed race advocacy, as well as LGBTQ and TG and CI plus advocacy. And I'm really inspired by forums that did take place in the 60s and 70s, the Chicano like moratorium being one of them, and that really being a space where there's dialogue, and there is also listening to voices who have personal insight, and are on the ground doing really important political work. And yeah, so I would say most definitely it's a forum to just bring people together in one room, and the purpose of it would be, I would say, to definitely challenge and transform isolation that I believe mixed and multiracial, trans and gender expansive people experience.
Mhm.
I found as someone involved in queer and trans organizing since I was a youth, and growing into adulthood, and through research as well as a librarian, that there aren't carved out spaces for mixed and multiracial people. There isn't like a formal recognition, I feel, yet within queer and trans spaces,
Mm.
organizations, community centers, and yeah, I feel like a forum, in a real sense, brings about that urgency or need to just come together and bring people together.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think when you're like a multi intersectional person, one of the things that kind of comes up often on this show and just our lives in general is this idea of like you have to pick your main identity and anything else is just sort of tagging along or whatever. And while I think that is true in sense of like as you're going through your phases of figuring out who you are, it's not true in the sense of pick one. You're not one. You're too many things. I'm at all times a Black, Asian, queer person, and so like all of these things need to be accounted for in everything that I do. And so, like when I was talking to you offline a little bit earlier, like when I created Militantly Mixed, I created a space based off of a gap that I was feeling. Yes, at all times I'm a mixed and queer person, but at the time I created the show, my biggest gap was being around mixed people. I grew up very mixed. I have a mixed family, biracial parents. All my cousins are mixed. We lived together. I grew up military, so all the people were mixed around us. And then I became an adult, and I had one or two people that were still in my life that were mixed, and I was like, I need to be around mixed people. Everything I'm involved in feels foreign to me. And then I created Militantly Mixed. And then as I grew in comfort and everything like that, and as the show expanded, I started to crave the community of my other intersections. And so I found that like I could have those those safe spaces separately, but not together. And that is, one of those other things that it's like it's a huge gap that we need filled. And I know for a fact there are many mixed and multiracial and trans listeners of the show because I do talk about my experience. I guess I understand that I'm in the trans umbrella, but I think because of different ideas that I had in my early education about transness, I didn't feel like I was checking off all of the trans boxes necessarily. And so for the longest, it took me forever to figure out what my deal was. I finally discovered the term and sort of adapted to the term of being a bigendered person. So not non-binary, but binary. At all times I feel masculine and feminine. And so that's the term that works for me. But I find that I know so few spaces that if I go to and I talk within transness, that's one thing. But if I include my mixedness, it's like, well, it's not really the same. But I think you and I can attest to how many similarities there are in being a person who experiences mixedness and transness in some form or fashion. Um, how did you come to like the identity overlap between the two things? How did you start to notice that they were fairly similar?
I would say within the past 4 to 5 years, I've been just more wanting to embrace myself as mixed. I think that has been informed by mixed race advocacy that's been happening within the past 5 to 10 years online. Absolutely, coming across resources that I've been wanting to like search for and share with other close friends of mine who are mixed. And it was in 2020 when I created a space with my closest friends called Mixed Feelings, which was like a DIY mental health space for us through Zoom.
Hmm.
Like come together and talk about what it meant for us to be mixed during these times in the United States, where racism is on a rise, white supremacy is on a rise, and what that means for us as mixed people, and our mental health with like the shutdown, COVID, feeling isolated, being isolated. But I think 2020 really was a time to reflect, self-reflect on who I am and how I want to live. And it has been through friendship and relationships with other mixed people where I have like um, been able to affirm myself, because even though I did grow up in a diverse place in Los Angeles, I I feel yeah, leaving LA, living in the Bay Area, living in Texas for a little while, just how unfamiliar if you're not around diversity and if you're not around other mixed families and people, you have to over explain yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I've just been on this journey, yeah, to just like really practice self-love, and and honesty about who I am in this world. And um I would say embracing myself as trans came first.
Oh,
And
it
I
did.
Yeah, it did. It actually, yeah, I came to understand myself as non-binary when I was about like 20, 21 years old. And
Mm,
I always knew I was mixed growing up. My family did use the word mixed. Um, Even though my parents are divorced, there's just like a lot of respect for my grandparents, my dad's parents who were in an interracial marriage, and my parents grew up in Venice, so they had known each other since they were kids, and Venice was definitely like a sanctuary for a lot of interracial families and mixed families during that time, which was the 60s.
mm,
And it was like really the only place for my grandparents to raise their kids um, at the time. My parents are baby boomers, born in the early 60s. And yeah, so Venice is a very diverse place. And I knew a lot of other mixed people growing up, but I don't think even that familiarity shielded me from a lot of like internalized shame, not feeling like embraced fully by, I would say like my own family, at times in context.
mhm.
Um, and yeah, so I've been on this journey, but yeah, definitely healing and challenging binaries around my racial identity came after really realizing like I've been conditioned to understand myself as cis and I'm not cis. And I think that questioning of myself just went in alignment with who I was meeting. And I think living in California, I've met other mixed people, leaving LA, but always knowing that we were kind of like um, having kind of sidebar conversations in these like political spaces that I was a part of in my early 20s. And
Mm.
like I can only really have those conversations with other mixed people that never really seen like there was a centering of mixed people or an embrace, like a really full embrace of mixed people.
Yeah, I found, especially throughout doing this show, that a lot of people view racial identity as political, which, ah, yeah, I mean, like I'm born this way. It's not my fault that my parents were interracially well, they're mixed race too. So like mixed and then interracial relationship themselves to create me. And yet just how I popped out is somehow political. And so I'm allowed, with quotation fingers, permission to talk about politics from that scope and that scope alone. But if I try to convince a white cis heterosexual male that my identity shouldn't be up for voting, in some way, shape, or form, then it's like, no, 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 we can't. You can have the politics conversation, you can have the race conversation, but but when I want to talk about race, then somehow that's also political, and then it's just this weird, stupid, crazy thing. And then forget about start throwing in gender identity or sexuality, and then everything is out of control and crazy. So not having safe places, or even in some cases safe people, even just one safe person in some cases, to be able to be your whole self. I mean, be your mixed as self is a big part of the way I push Militantly Mixed. I want it to be a resource to help people embrace their mixedness in whatever form that is. That being said, that doesn't not include whatever else you got going on, whatever your other intersections are. And for me, being my mixed ass self includes my queerness. It includes my gender identity and everything. And so that's what brings me to the excitement about what you're starting with Transpire. So on the face of it, like the longevity of it is that it is a virtual forum so that people can continuously have a safe space to talk within mixedness and transness. But this event that we have coming up, will you talk a little bit more about what that is and its purpose for anybody in the audience who might like to watch or listen?
Definitely. So it's definitely an archive of it's something that people can find. So it's like a resource, something that's out there. Um, and something that people can reference, especially people who are working within institutions, outside of institutions, who are, really advocating for mixed race and trans representation and advocacy, to say like we exist. There's a need for representation. There's a need for acknowledgement, and I would say we were talking about the intersections of transness and mixedness earlier. That there is a lot of erasure that I believe mixed and trans people experience. A lot of just discrediting that really, for me as a mixed trans person, is happening at multiple angles, depending on who I'm interacting with, but generally with the majority of people I interact with. And its purpose is for people who, whether they attend the event live or not, can find online, find as something that exists, that there is language, there are people who have been thinking about what it means for them to be mixed and trans right now at this moment in time.
Mm.
And historically as well, because I think we have always existed. Um, and I don't think we're anything new.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just think whether it's fear or ignorance, or whether it's lack of information or knowledge, I just think that there's better ways that people can build and be in relationship with us. And so this event is definitely for those who are seeking support, seeking community, um, wanting to find people who are like or like-minded, or who can expand on what someone has is feeling about themselves and their identities, but also for people who are allies, doing all types of work, anti-racist work, queer and trans advocacy work, who have not necessarily considered us and our voices, and to be present as allies to change that within the places where we really need support. And I'll emphasize, like, this did come out of the reality that through my own like research, really seeing that we are under researched. We're not just, there isn't just a lack of representation in social and political spaces, but we are severely under researched. So the society doesn't even really know, what our needs are, how we're experiencing disenfranchisement, and I think that needs to change. There's only been one study on a national scale that was done about 11 years ago, um, that focused on multiracial transgender people's health, and that
Mm.
study itself really highlighted that mixed and multiracial trans people actually experience the highest rates of disparities in several areas of life, including employment, including HIV rates, income. And so there's just, there's not enough information. But the reality is that, we're not being represented, and our needs are not being met. And I think that needs to be reckoned with. And so I created
Mhm.
Inspire because I want uh, mixed and multiracial trans and gender expansive people to feel validated. But I also want to hold, you know, all advocates, activists accountable, to say like we are here. There's a need for change in how, not only how we discuss gender, but how we discuss race. And I think we embody that. I think more than ever we embody the need to move beyond binary thinking. And and yeah, I guess it has to come from us.
Yeah. Yeah,
Unfortunately.
unfortunately. I mean, when you put things like the right for women to vote, women wouldn't have gotten the vote if there weren't men who voted to allow women to get the vote. That being said, that didn't do everything, right? Then it was another fight for Black women and Black men, and then Native American women, and then Asian women. Like it became this whole tier of a thing. So in terms, and it was only because women were advocating for their right to vote to even convince men who were voters to get us there. What we're doing in our different respective um, platforms is just that, right? It's, a white cis heterosexual male was not going to figure out that, hey, maybe mixed folks need a platform, or hey, maybe mixed trans folks need health services that are slightly different than maybe just a white cis heterosexual person might need. Because in terms of gender identity, we rely pretty heavily on the mental health field, because so much is telling us our existence isn't correct, that we need that extra support to not only validate us but also help us maneuver a system that doesn't either believe we exist, or if they accept that we exist, won't make room for us to exist. And all of these things are very important. And the downside for me, I think, of being a social activist in any way, shape, or form is that you come from your lens.
Mhm.
Whatever your intersections are, that's the lens you come from. And if something else is going on with somebody else, you might not know to account for. And the only way you're going to learn is if you're in rooms with these people and they speak up and say, hey, you're doing great to accommodate mixed folks, you're doing great to accommodate trans folks, but what about differently abled people? Is there some sort of universal design included in the work that we do? And then now we have to expand and be like, oh, you're right. Most of the people in this room didn't have that. Now that you're here, we now know we have to incorporate that. And the only way we're going to learn these things is if we get in more rooms together. And so I think this is an opportunity through Transpire to give to open it up to where it's not like pick your intersection of choice or pick your hierarchical intersection. Not to say that it's necessarily wrong to have a hierarchical identity. It's just that you might not know that you don't have to. You might not know that it's available for you to exist as a fully formed mixed and trans person if that is your intersection. So can you talk a little bit more about the expectation of what's going to happen on the virtual event on August 10th for Transpire? And is this something that's going to continue on in the future beyond just the forum part itself?
Definitely. So I imagine it to be a space that opens up explaining the origins of Transpire, and I can share later on what those are specifically, but really grounding the space in accords, agreements, and how to be with each other, that being a collective process as well, asking for feedback for people who are there that day, like what are some agreements in collective spaces that you'd like to be honored. And we would start off with the panel. So the first half of the event will be a panel, and we have a panel of, I believe, 5 speakers and 1 facilitator, all of whom identify as mixed, multiracial, trans, or gender expansive. And so far, we've announced a couple of our speakers. So, folks, if you'd like to see who's going to speak at the event, there's an Instagram with the handle Transpire Together. And we're still unfolding and announcing speakers. And there will be a break afterwards, and then there will be a community dialogue where people who, either watched or missed the panel will, get to participate and share who they are. And there will be questions for that dialogue, but it will also be very open. Um, and yeah, it's very loose in that there will be questions for panelists to answer, but if panelists have something, more pressing, or just feel called to speak on something more than what the questions are, focusing on, that's perfectly fine. It's very fluid. um, I really think that's important, fluidity, and like creating a space that's accessible for people. So there's no expectation for people to be on camera. um, I really want to create a space that's comfortable, where people can eat, where people can stim, where people can just be themselves. Um, and hopefully, I mean, if we create the space together with a lot of care and respect, just a space where people can let go a lot of, like, pretenses, just try to create a safer space as best as we can. But I'm really excited. I think this came together very naturally, and I can share more of what I mean by that.
I do want to mention, because I think I missed saying it in the beginning, because I've always felt like I understand that my identity falls under the trans umbrella. I never felt, and still right now don't feel comfortable claiming transness, because I don't believe I experience quite the same disenfranchisement in some cases that a lot of the trans people that are close to me do. But including the term for gender expansive, which is not one that I'm as familiar with. I've heard it, but it sort of flitters away because it's not um, as often used. I really appreciate it, because with that wording, I feel included. Like, I think I signed on to the panel before I really felt like, in my head I was like, well, got to support the mixed team, but am I trans enough? So, going through the thing that I think we go through as mixed people when you're trying to feel enough of something, I definitely experience within the trans umbrella too. Is, am I trans enough to claim transness? But gender expansive definitely feels comfortable for me. So I just want to thank you for that language, because you're gonna start hearing it. You're gonna start hearing me say it, because now I have it. Um, how do people gain access to the event if they want to participate in it live on August 10th?
I set up a link tree. There's a link tree on the Instagram bio. You can find it. There's a link to the Zoom registration. All that's asked is for name and email. So we can email a link out the morning of. And it is a 3-hour event. We don't expect for people to show up for the entirety. Really respect people's capacity. So if you just wanted to join for the panel, that's okay. If you wanted to drop in later for the dialogue, that's okay. There will be an announcement on Instagram of the itinerary, just the agenda of the day, so people have it. So there's transparency. I know, as someone who deals with a lot of social anxiety, that I love when events like really map out what to expect. So that will definitely be out there on Instagram before the day of the event. Um, yeah, there's no expectation to be extroverted to speak, especially if you're just there to listen. Um, and the same goes with the speakers and panelists. Like, however you want to participate, um, whatever feels good and comfortable. Um,
One thing that we got out of the horror that is still continuing on with COVID is the ability to view events now in virtual spaces as a legitimate way to host community-based events. And I think even now, as people are trying to continue to reclaim in-person events and things like that, if you're not incorporating at least a hybrid virtual aspect, you're not being very inclusive or accessible and stuff like that. So in this respect, I'm really glad to have the opportunity to participate in something virtually, knowing that the cousins out there are all over the map, and might not be able to get to the Bay Area or LA at any time for these events, but we'll still be able to have access to things, and hopefully be able to engage in whatever form or fashion. I also love that you mentioned, if you need to eat or stem, because like literally it's a struggle while recording these things sometimes for me not to snack or try to
yeah.
kind of lean over to the side of the screen and stuff like that. I also rock a lot, and sometimes that indicates for people who aren't used to seeing it. If I rock one direction, it's my social anxiety. If I rock a different direction, it's my comfort or I'm happy. But in both cases, I need space to be able to do that without it being like, Sharmane, what's going on, because sometimes it can be quite drastic where I'm just like literally doing that, and I know that can be distracting for people who aren't used to it. So already in that accommodation, I think this is looking good for folks that aren't just coming from the identities of mixed, multiracial, and trans, but potentially like you know ADHD or different types of autism spectrum things that will sometimes make people not participate in something because
Mhm.
they don't know that space is made for them. So I appreciate that you're in considering that and including that in this also while it being a virtual thing. So in the show notes of this, so if you're watching it, I have put the IG up on the screen. If you're not, I will include it in the show, or in both cases, I'll include the link in the show notes so that people uh, can participate. What time is the event happening
It's
for the
happening
audience?
Pacific Standard Time, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m.
Okay.
And we will try to get started around 11:10. You never know, people will come in, so 11:15 at the latest. And we'll take breaks, especially after the panel. There will be a break of around like 15 minutes. Um, and you're welcome to leave, you're welcome to stay for the community dialogue. Um, and yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you for inviting me
Mhm.
first to even participate on this panel, but to also come on here to talk a little bit more about the event so that people have access to it. Um, what is your future hope for Transpire, and what you hope it grows into as these events start occurring more frequently and the forum itself expands?
My hope is for it to change from it being something organized by one person, and it to truly become a collective space. And that's not just my hope. I have a commitment to make sure that happens. Um, I want it to be a space where people who have, the desire to uh, organize with people, commune in any way, in any capacity, to get together online. I did create a Discord, which I'll announce during the event, in the
Okay.
beginning and towards the end, for people to keep in touch. And I would hope for more people, if they feel called to want to come forward and organize future events. There was someone who reached out to me asking, like, will this just focus on people living in LA and the Bay, and why? And I explained why
Hmm.
these two regions particularly, which you can find on the Instagram, which is Professor Syra Khan, who's written some really important research on mixed race, multiracial identity, wrote this really brief article called "California is the Home of the Multiracial Movement," and in it,
Oh, interesting.
she poses how powerful it could be for both regions to unite in the state of California around, representation, around legislation. For multiracial, mixed and multiracial people, that we're actually these reasons are not yet in conversation with each other. And so I wanted to create this forum so I can bring advocates, professionals, artists who are living in both of these regions, particularly. With that said, someone reached out who's from the Central Valley, the San Joaquin Valley, who asked, like, why isn't there representation for people living in the Central Valley? And I said, actually, that is a great point. And I explained why that wasn't, but that's really important, and really important to me because my grandfather on my father's side is from Hanford, California, which is a small agricultural town, um, with both a white and Mexican, and also mixed community population. And I know what it means to, through his experience, like what it means for people who are poor and working class in the San Joaquin Valley. And so I
Hmm.
think Central Valley, elevating the Central Valley is super important as well. Whenever we're talking about California politics, um, Central Valley is extremely underrepresented.
And yet they can swing us in a lot of different directions,
Absolutely.
because there's enough of them to swing us. Yeah. Uh, it's also fair to say you have to start somewhere.
Yeah. Oh,
And
totally.
sometimes it's easier to start in the region that you're in and the region that you're familiar in. Militantly Mixed, while has a designed to be a global podcast. You know, I can't help that because I started in the United States. The United States gets the bulk of the attention, and the audience, you know, the people who come to try to be guests on the show tend to be from here, because of that. So, you know, you do have to start somewhere. It doesn't mean that it's entirely exclusive, but starting from where your knowledge base is, and then allowing over time as other leaders show themselves, they might be in North Carolina in the future, you know, but like the mission and want to mirror it. So, you know, it makes sense. You got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Before we get out of here, though, even though we're here mostly talking about the Transpire event, you know, I do like to ask all my guests one question that I ask everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and ask that question to you. What do you love most about being mixed?
I think being mixed has allowed me the space to question everything, question authority, really question this paradigm that I live within. And since I was a really young person, always questioning, like asking the whys and really wanting to understand, like, you know, especially when it came to not really being accepted and experiencing um, exclusion in a lot of ways, like why is this happening, but just really having an open and expansive mind to where, like, I'm a huge reader. I think, like, you know, I read a lot, and I really like love reading theory and research, and I just think being expansive within myself, I can't just attribute that to my gender identity. I think being mixed has allowed me, seeing what my grandparents went through and faced. They were married before, you know, interracial marriage became legalized on a federal level, and they dealt with a lot of racism, a lot of harm in their lifetimes, and just my grandfather and my grandmother really choosing themselves and choosing love. I think I love that about being mixed, is really um, standing up for what is right, and having strong convictions, but also challenging myself and questioning my own beliefs constantly, and being in that internal space where I'm never content with the conclusions I make, and I'm really open to listening to another way of seeing the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you again for joining me, and I guess I'll see you virtually again, again virtually on August 10th. For everybody out there, if you are interested in participating in the Transpire virtual panel and forum event, head on over to the Instagram account of @Transpire Together. I will put links in the show notes, both on the YouTube and the podcast, so that people can gain access to it. Try to register in advance so that they, you know what to expect, and share and tell your friends if you think that this space might be a healthy and safe spot for them to participate in. And for everybody out there, don't forget to be your mixed as self. Peace, y'all. Militantly Mixed is a ManeHustle media podcast, produced and hosted by me, Sharmane Fury. Music is by David Bogan the One. You can follow us on social media on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook @Militantly Mixed. If you'd like to become a sponsor of Militantly Mixed, please go to patreon.com/militantlymixed for monthly sponsorship, or paypal.me/militantlymixed for a one-time only donation. And if you like what you hear on Militantly Mixed, please subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And don't forget to be your mixed ass self. ManeHustle Media. Turn your side hustle into your main hustle.